With me tonight is also Rona from SpaceIL. Raise your hand. Rona is our chief of staff, and I'm happy to be here today. I see that you're all familiar with the Google Lunar X Prize competition. That's how it started 2 years ago. Today we look at SpaceIL as something that is supposed to make even a bigger impact than just winning a competition. And I think that that's what Google or the X Prize Foundation really intended this competition to be. Until today, only 2 nations or even empires have managed to soft land on the moon. You have the Apollo mission back from 1969, and prior to that you had the unmanned missions, the Surveyor missions, the Surveyor project. And back in 1970, you also had the Lunokhod 1 and 2 missions, unmanned missions, Soviet missions to the moon. Back then, the Soviets had a really interesting way of numbering their missions. They launched the Lunokhod to the moon, and that Lunokhod missed. So they launched another Lunokhod to the moon, and that malfunctioned and crashed. So they launched another Lunokhod to the moon. This time it landed. That was Lunokhod 1. So I'm not sure how they number the missions today, but for SpaceIL we have 1 spaceship, so it's not going to be a problem. We're still thinking about the name of the craft itself. We'll probably post it over as a question to our audience a year or 2 from now. We thought about Hatikva, about Golda, if you're a sparrow. The US sent the eagle, so we'll send the sparrow. Small spaceship, 40 years at last. But what we realized when we just started is that SpaceIL is, well, besides sending a small spaceship to the moon, we can leverage it into something much bigger that can create a much bigger impact. And that's when we connected to our vision. You have to excuse me, there's a type error here. But we wanted to recreate something that back in the 60s was called the Apollo effect. And we'll get to that soon. There's a
Sorry,
clicker?
yes.
Amazing.
For the reason we just want to use this.
Work. Amazing.
Sorry for the interruption.
Thank you. So we realized we want to accomplish something much bigger, leverage the small spaceship into something that can impact the nation. This is an article, the headlines from Haaretz, one of Israel's newspaper. This is from 2 or 3 months ago, even a bit before. It's the same thing in the entire Western world. Kids are not into STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math. You have some facts below. The number of engineering graduates in Israel has been frozen for the past 5 years. The IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, are missing more than 12,000 candidates, technologically oriented candidates annually. It's got to a degree that the Israeli Air Force is opening up academies for high school students. So when they reach the age of 18 and get drafted for the army, for the military service, they'll have the capabilities that the army already needs. We were ranked at the 31st, distinguished 31st place when it comes to education back in 2009. It's, we're not doing that good, but it's the same all over the world. Israel, we don't have too many natural resources. One of our only resources is our people. So you can have a look at this and imagine what will happen to Israel 10, 20 years from now. And there is a solution. What you're seeing here is a graph that was plotted back in the 70s after the Apollo mission. We all heard about the side effects of the Apollo mission, the new microprocessors, the telemedicine, the great coffee, the soles of your Nike shoes. A lot of amazing technologies were created because of the Apollo mission. But back then another amazing thing has happened. And that is that the amount of students, PhDs, in engineering, in physics, in math, during that decade went up. And one of the reasons those numbers jumped up was because that kids that grew up during those days, besides seeing American Idol or Johnny Carson back on the day, also saw from time to time an engineer, a scientist, an astronaut. they weren't 24/7 all around them, but they were just a bit impacted because of what they saw on the TV screens back then. And that is something that we want to recreate in Israel and around the entire Jewish population. We're not waiting for that singular moment to happen. We're not waiting for the Israeli landing on the moon in 2015 to happen to make an impact. SpaceIL is a non-profit, an educational non-profit, and we started off when we just started thinking about the spaceship. We already started planning the educational impact, and we'll get to that further down the presentation. Our story begins 2.2 years ago. I was one of the organizers of a really cool Israeli creativity camp. We were visited by President Peres back in 2010. And after he visited us, I sat down with a friend, and we started talking. I told him, listen, this year we had President Peres, and I thought that next year we should have something bigger. Now, bringing Obama to a camp in the desert in Israel, I don't think it will happen, but I thought about launching a rocket to the edge of space, taking some images and bring it back to Earth and just take the pictures out. And my friend told me, well, you're not thinking big enough. I told him, what? You're talking about a nanosatellite, a CubeSat? We don't have the budget for that in our camp. And he said, well, what about the Google Lunar X Prize competition? And I told him, well, you're nuts, you're crazy. Reaching the moon, we're in Israel. Luckily for me, that friend has a great collection of whiskey. He lives not too far away from me, and it was like 1 a.m. in the morning. I was strolling the streets of Tel Aviv, and I said to myself, well, if I would have opened the team, I would have called it. And I thought, well, let's see if the domain name SpaceIL.com is taken. And that night at around 1 a.m., I registered the domain name. Then I started investigating about the competition. Well, the competition was open for registration 2.5 years before I started, investigating the thing. And I saw that registration was $50,000. But there was an option to send $1,000 and get a letter of intent, that your intent to participate in the race. So I did what every other Israeli would do. I started using my connections. I sent an email to Jonathan, a friend from the Israeli aerospace industries, and I told him, listen, remember we talked about the rocket to the edge of space? Forget about it, I have a crazy idea, let's meet. And he told me, well, I'm free over the weekend, let's have a beer and talk about it. And I was, really excited and motivated. So I posted on my Facebook wall, okay, domain name check, first deposit for registration check. Now all we need is a team and some sponsors. Who wants to go to the moon? And Phil, which I didn't really know, he was a Facebook friend, told me, well, if you're serious about the competition, I'm in. And that's how Jonathan Kfir and I sat down in a pub in Hulon. It's a small town next to Tel Aviv. They only have one pub. And we sat down and we started designing the spaceship. Now the 2 papers you see over here, these are the original papers we wrote on during that night. They're not napkins, we're engineers. They're A4 papers. But I have to tell you, when you look at the timeline, when you look at the size, when you look at our budget, wow, we were so off, we were so wrong that night. It was amazing. We started off in a spaceship that was about the size of a Coca-Cola bottle. Jonathan did some really rough calculations, and if our spaceship was just fuel, then that would have been enough to take just the fuel to the edge of moon, to the surface of the moon. Since then, our spaceship grew a bit, but it's still a very small spaceship. To the left, you have the Apollo 11 lander. Next to it, you have Neil Armstrong, for instance. And that little spot to the right, that's the Israeli spaceship. It's small, but it's quite sophisticated. So we started off 3 guys thinking about reaching the moon. And one of the first things that we did was to email Professor Yitzhak Ben Israel. He's the chairman of the Israeli Space Agency. Now think about the administrator of NASA receiving an email from 3 20-something-year-old guys telling him, listen, Professor Ben Israel, we're going to send the Israeli spaceship to the moon. can you meet with us? We need your support. And he accepted us for a meeting. And he's known for his temper. And sure enough, after 5 minutes, he grabbed our presentation, my laptop, and he started, advancing through the slides by himself. And we were thinking, wow, that's the end of the story. And instead, he went all the way to the end, and he told us, well, I'm with you guys. In fact, a month from now, I have a big presentation, a big conference, a space conference with the Deputy Administrator of NASA, with the Chairman of the Israeli Space Agency, of the European Space Agency, with a few other officials, with the general public from Israel. And I want you to declare SpaceIL on stage in front of all of that audience. And it was quite amazing. He knew that our budget we were way off from what we needed. He knew our timeline was wrong. But still, he said, well, I need you. Ever since we got started, we were joined by a few other distinguished board members. For instance, the president of the Weizmann Institute, the president of Tel Aviv University. To the upper right corner, you have Mr. Aryeh Halsband. This is the manager of the manager of the manager of the manager of Yonatan, my partner. And it started off by him screaming at Yonatan, how can you do something like that without telling your bosses? And it ended up by Aryeh joining forces with us, and today is Yonatan's mentor. When we stood on stage for those 15 minutes, we did our presentation, we came back down, we were approached by an old guy. And he asked us, you're the SpaceIL guys, do you have any money? And we told him, no, we just got started, we've got nothing. And he said, well, I'll give you some seed money, $100,000 to start, no obligations. And that's Maurice Kahn, he's next to Yankee over here, the board members. And today is our biggest supporter. We were joined by people like Yankee Margalit, he's our chairman of the public board. He's between half job and 100% dedicated to SpaceIL. And it's good, Yankee was the CEO of a NASDAQ traded company for I don't know how many years. So he's also my personal mentor as a CEO. We were joined by people like Rona Ramon, the wife of the late astronaut Ilan Ramon. She has the Ramon Foundation, which are targeting similar audiences and are working on a similar vision. So they're natural partners. We were joined by other amazing people like Dov Ba'arav, is the chairman of the Israeli Aerospace Industries, which is important because the Israeli Aerospace Industries have pledged $3.5 million in support in R&D hours for SpaceIL. So instead of me renting engineers, I have the Israeli Aerospace Industries. Since then we grew up a bit, we're not just three guys. This is an image from a year ago with our youngest volunteer, President Perez, and with Rona Ramon. And to the left over you have our oldest volunteer, Amit. Today he's 15 years old, back then he was 14. We have more than 200 team members. In this picture we had about 100. We have 11 full-time employees, and we're about to go up to 20. We need more engineers on our team. This image is quite old. It's more than a year ago, but it's not that easy to bring Shimon Peres with Rona Ramon, with Maurice Kahn into the Israeli aerospace industries. So this is the best image we have today. I'm thinking the next time we have such an image is prior to the launch. So we're going to go with that image for the next few years. If you want to build a spaceship in Israel, you can have an amazing team, but you also need the right partners. And that's why we're fortunate enough to have the Israeli Aerospace Industries. That's the only facility in Israel where you can build a spaceship. We have partners such as Elbit Systems. They're in charge of the electro-optic systems, the cameras, the optics themselves. People from Rafael Industries as well. And what's nice about Israel is that these guys are all in 1 hour distance from one another. So if I want to have a really fast meeting with engineers from different disciplines, I don't have to book it 2 months in advance and everybody has to fly in with different hours, etc. I can just drive there. That's part of how we can do things a bit faster than our competitors. We were also joined by the Israeli Space Agency, ISA. They are supporting us with $1.5 million. According to the competition rules, you can have up to 10% governmental funds. ISA right now is supporting us with 5%. It's not easy getting money from the Israeli government, but 2 years from now we'll go for the second lot. We have academic partners, the Weizmann Institute, Tel Aviv University, the Technion, and if I want to make an educational impact, as well as sending a spaceship to the moon, I must have the right partners when it comes to education. I can't do anything by myself. SpaceIL cannot build a spaceship by itself. We cannot make an educational impact by ourselves. That's why we're fortunate enough to have the Ramon Foundation, the Davidson Institute, part of the Weizmann Institute. They are the ones who are developing all the curriculums for the science teachers of Israel. So when they're building a curriculum for SpaceIL as well, we know we're on the right path to impacting the kids of Israel. And of course, we're also part of the Google Lunar X Prize competition. The competition started off almost 5 years ago, I think. I'm not really sure. When the registration closed, we were 33 teams in the race. Today, we're down to 23 teams in the race. And we were already approached by a few other teams in the past months to ask about a possible merger, so you can expect that number to go down. The competition rules are quite simple. It's a very simple competition. Thank you for your $50,000 registration. Good luck. Well, it's 80 pages long of a document that you have to sign and everything, but it all comes down to let us know before you launch. The first team that lands on the moon moves 500 meters, transmit back images and videos, wins the race. There's no bus to take you there. You don't have to issue academic papers, nothing. If you're a private investor or a private organization and you want to pay Boeing $1 billion to take you to the moon, be our guest, you will win $20 million. And if you want to walk from a shack in the desert and design everything by yourself, good luck with that as well. So it's a very open competition. And well, the bad news was that we were the last team to enter the race. There were teams already running more than 2 years when we registered. It's an Israeli story. So we literally registered on the last day possible, December 31st, 2010. When we decided that we want to open SpaceIL as a non-profit, friends told us, well, opening a non-profit in Israel, it's going to take you a day or two. It doesn't take a day or two. It took me a day or two of begging in Jerusalem to the clerics to open up the non-profit. We had to raise $50,000 in like 10 days. We reached out to friends of friends, to small industry, small commercial companies in Israel. Each one just gave a bit. And on Thursday evening, we went into the online bank account and we had like something like $22,000 in our bank account, which was just open. And when you go to a bank manager, to a branch manager, and you tell him, listen, I have to open an account really fast, money's going to pour in and then I'm going to wire it to the States. It took him some time to be relaxed again. So on Thursday evening, we had like $22,000. And we called up all the all our supporters, and they all assured us that money has already been wired, and that we should see it tomorrow morning in our bank account. In Israel, Friday morning, most of the bank branches are closed. Luckily, we checked in advance. Our branch was opened, and we found ourselves on a Friday morning at our bank branch, and we had $52,000 in our account. We immediately wired $50,000 to Google, and the woman who took care of us, she told us, wait here a second. And she went to the kitchen and brought back the remains of a birthday cake from that morning. And that's how we celebrated wiring the money with the used cake. Since then, we really advanced quite much. Today, if you go into the Google Lunar X Prize website, our logo is actually on the first row to the left. And that's because one of the teams, in fact the first team to register to race, Odyssey Moon, merged with SpaceIL 2 months ago or so. So we went from being the last icon, the last team, to the first team, which, they started telling us, you're going to have your logo in the first place. It should be amazing for you. And we told them, guys, we're Israelis. We like to be last. It's, showing the world that even though we're last, we'll finish up first. So a bit about the spaceship. I won't go into too many technical details. If we'll have time, I have a different presentation in Hebrew that shows some of the algorithms, some of the things that we've already developed on our way to the moon. In here, we'll just really touch just a small portion of the technology. Most of the spaceship is actually a propulsion system. Our spaceship weighs roughly 120 kilos, out of which more than 80 kilos is fuel. You have your fuel, you have your oxidizer tanks, you have your gas tank, you compress all the fuel so it will reach the thruster. And basically, for every kilo of payload that you send to the moon, you have to take between 3 and 4 kilos of a propulsion system with you. The fuel plus the thrusters, and when your payload grows, you have to put extra thrusters or buy bigger thrusters, and the entire spaceship goes up. When we registered to the race, well, the bad news was that we registered last. The good news that we had a lot of teams to learn from, where they got stuck, how they did things, what worked for them, what didn't. And what we saw was that most of the teams started off with a rover, like a vehicle with wheels and everything that they want to take to the moon. Well, the good news for those teams was that they developed a rover. And 2 years ago, you could see a rover moving around and everything, and they showed it to investors. The bad news was that the rover is just the beginning. You have to take that rover and land it on the moon. That's the hard part, not moving the rover. And for every kilo of a rover, your lander starts increasing. Plus, there's all the moving parts. Plus, you have to communicate between the rover and your lander, or with the rover back to Earth. It creates a much complicated mission. And our goal was, from day one, keep it simple. We're not in it for the bonus prizes, even though we're hoping to win one or two. We're in it because we want to send the spaceship to the moon, an Israeli spaceship to the moon. For instance, we don't have any wheels, as you can see. This is a hopper mission. According to the competition rules, when you really look inside, you can go on, above, or below the surface of the moon. No other team chose below the surface of the moon. It sounds a bit harder. We were one of the only teams to choose above, to hop above. I just had a propulsion system that brought me all the way to the surface of the moon. I'm going to reignite it and hop 500 meters. And some of our competitors, you can see them in the past year or so, at least one or two moved to a hopper configuration. Because one of the hardest parts in this race is the launch part. Now, sending something to space, roughly speaking, is like sending a FedEx package. The smaller you are, the more lightweight you are, the less it will cost you. When you're sending a full-size satellite that weighs a few tons, 3 to 5 tons, you can expect the launch to cost you between $50 to $100 million. The entire budget of SpaceIL is $30 million. And the reason is that I'm not sending something that weighs a few tons. I'm sending a smaller package. I'm sending 120 kilos to space. To the left, this white blob is a full-size satellite that weighs a few tons. That's the primary payload of the launcher. In the middle, you can see the yellow separation ring, and on it, you'll see some secondary payloads. These are payloads like the Israeli spaceship, smaller satellites, etc. To the right, you can see the start of the launcher. It should go way beyond that wall. This is really a very small part of the entire launcher. Now, the good part is that we pay a lot less to reach an orbit around Earth. The bad part is that we don't control the date or the trajectory. We're only piggybacking, we're hitchhikers. So you pay up for the launch company. When you start paying them for the launch, you also supply them with it's called, I know it's called in Hebrew, it's like a weight, something that looks like your spaceship with the same mass of the spaceship. And when you finish paying up and the launch is ready to go, if you don't show up with your spaceship, they're going to take the dead weight with them instead of you, and they're not going to refund you. You're a hitchhiker. Their mission is putting the big satellite up there. You're just a hitchhiker. They did all the analysis with your weight, with your spaceship on board, and they're going to take either you or the dead weight with them. Whoever's going to be ready first, or to the date. Now, when we get launched into space, we go into an orbit around the Earth, that green orbit around the Earth. That's about 20,000 miles above Earth. Just for comparison, you've heard about the Virgin Galactic. Richard Branson is taking up people to space. So he's taking them up to roughly 60 miles. Our spaceship that will be launched with the satellite, a commercial full-size satellite, will go into 20,000 miles. The moon is at roughly 200,000 miles, 10 times that. So most of the way has to be done by our own spaceship, by our own propulsion system. And the reason you see there's like a nice twirl or that turquoise color is that once we get around the moon, the spaceship starts orbiting it. So we get a twirl like that around the moon. Most of the fuel, by the way, won't be used on the way. It will be used during the deceleration phase of the spaceship. You have to burn a lot of fuel to decelerate your speed and soft land on the moon. You can't use parachutes, you can't use any heat shields. The moon is just a big rock in the vacuum of space. So we once thought about using shrink wrap instead, and we did some calculation, some bubble wrap, sorry. We did some calculations, and if we were to impact the moon, it would be roughly 80,000 tons per square centimeter. So we're going to need a lot of bubble wrap to stop the spaceship that way. So it's better to take some extra fuel and just decelerate that way. I won't go into all of that. Anybody knows what's work breakdown structure? Good, so I can lie, nobody knows. No. But this is like the top level of if I had V's on all these sublines and their sublines, I'd be already on the moon. That's the executive overview of building a spaceship. It starts with the management of an administration, how you manage the entire program. It continues with the system or system engineering. For instance, making sure that when your antennas are working, the radio communication is working, and your processor is working, and the thrusters are working, you'll have enough juice in the batteries to supply all the power. So these are system-wide considerations. Or for instance, making sure that your weight is not too high. Every engineer wants to put a few more bolts into his system. And you must have, we have a guy whose sole job is in charge of the mass budget, making sure that the mass stays the same, and nobody puts extra mass on it. You have the spacecraft different modules. Start with the propulsion system, with the attitude and orbit control, the structure, the chassis itself, the harnesses, the avionics, onboard computers, all the cameras. There are a few cameras on the spaceship. We have to comply with the Google Lunar Express requirements. A panoramic view, a self view, HD video, low resolution real-time video from the moon. It's not an easy task. For instance, your cellular phones, they communicate with their base stations at roughly, let's say, up to 1 mile, a distance of 1 mile. And what you get is voice communication. We have to transfer videos from 200,000 miles. That's a lot harder. You have the communication system to transfer the videos, etc. All the electrical power and the thermal systems. For instance, in space, I cannot use, if my processor will start heating up, I cannot use a fan. There's no air in space. I can power up a fan, but it will just, the fan will get warmer and warmer until it melts down. So you have to design everything in advance, and there's no beta. Once you send your spaceship to orbit around Earth, nobody can press the reset button. There was an amazing example a few years ago. I'm not sure from which country, so we'll keep it. I don't want to, talk bad about any country. One of the countries launched a satellite, and they had some malfunctions with the radio system, with the modem. And what the engineer at the control room did, well, he said, we had that problem here on Earth. So what we did was to close the communication system and then power it up back. And that solved the problem. So they sent a command to the satellite, and the command was shut down your communication system. And then they sent a command to power up the communication system. And that's how a $300 million satellite became a rock orbiting Earth. And there's no one there to press the reset button. The manager of the Israeli Space Division, for instance, he likes to joke. He usually says that he gives full lifetime warranty as long as the company that bought the satellite brings it back to his facility. He'll take care of the satellite, no problem. So everything has to work from day one when you launch it into space. For example, the propulsion system, we're going to test each component separately. But the first time that fuel is going to go through the valves and through all the way to the thrusters is up there in space. We cannot test that in Israel. So you have to make sure that everything works. All those spacecraft modules have to be tested here on Earth with crazy simulations. Everything has to work on the first time. That's what makes space so special. Ground station, you want to communicate with your spaceship, send back images, videos, send commands to the spaceship. We want to have a joystick, here on Earth. The delay is too long. From the second you send the command to the spaceship until you get the acknowledge back, it can take up to 3 seconds when it's on the moon. So everything has to be done automatically on the moon. Assembly, integration, and testing, and that's when we test the spaceship and integrate all the different modules. The launcher is a very important step. We talked about the full launch that costs between $50 to $100 million. Then you have the cost of the satellite itself, between, $300 million to $700 million. So roughly speaking, you have a primary payload mission of $500 million. Then comes a team from Israel with some nice Israelis, and they approach the launcher and they tell him, listen, here are a few $1 million. Please put our explosive spaceship, most of it is fuel, with you, and launch us to space. Now, here's a $500 million mission. Now, let's assume that he will say, okay, I'm with you guys, come up on with me. His insurance company will raise the premium to $500 million. So you must have amazing support from the space industry in Israel, so they'll be able to stamp my spaceship, my propulsion system. That's the only way someone will take me with him. Otherwise, I'll have to buy my own lunch. Nobody will risk taking that spaceship with him. That's one of the main risks that we have today, and we're working really hard to make sure that our spaceship, which is built by full-time employees of SpaceIL with more than 200 volunteers, is made to the specifications of a real full-size satellite built by the Israeli aerospace industries. That's one mission that is not that easy. And at the end, you have your mission phase. That's the mission control room that you see over the movies. Everything is rehearsed months in advance. Every situation, every malfunction that can go off. Just for an example, we don't have an astronaut on board, so the spaceship has to do everything by itself. For instance, back then in the days, the astronauts of the Apollo mission, they had the joystick, and they could see where they're going, where there are rocks or places they can land, and they chose where to put the spaceship on the surface of the moon. Well, luckily for us, your cell phone today has more computing power, not just what was on the Apollo lander. This thing has more computing power than existed here on Earth during 1969. This is how strong these devices are. The problematic part of that is that my cell phone, for instance, is not space certified. If I put it in space, it could take days or months. No, I have to do a lot of testing to find out until it will stop working. There's a lot of space radiation. You could have bits, data bits, flipping in your memory, which is not a good thing when you have a space mission. Radiation could short circuit the chips inside, so they will just die instantly. And the way to handle that is to use space certified technology. Now, my cellular phone runs at about 1 gigahertz or 1000 megahertz. And I need that computing power. If I want to send back compressed videos, HD videos, and if I want to have my online real-time algorithms that test for rocks on the moon, or test for cliffs and hills, so the spaceship will decide where she's landing, I must have some very strong computing power for the spaceship. On the other hand, space processors run at roughly 1/100th of the speed of my cellular phone. They're doing it differently. We'll be using a computer or a space-proven chip that was designed in Israel. And what the engineers like to be proud of, they never tested it, of course, is that you can take your gun and shoot the processor, and it will continue working as if nothing happened. The level of redundancy when it goes to space is amazing. So we'll have on one side of the spaceship a small microprocessor that runs quite slow, but I'm assured that he will work throughout all the mission. On the other hand, we'll have a commercial processor that has to work on certain times when I need the compression to take place, or a few algorithms that will run on the spaceship. And that integration is something that is, at least for the Israeli space industry, is something quite new. So everything, it's a lot of risk management that takes place in the project. Luckily for us, it's an unmanned spaceship, so we don't need triple redundancy on everything. It's, we can ease off the redundancy needed. For instance, we're going to have two processors that do the video processing, and we'll only power them when we need them. One is a backup, one the primary, and that's how you can mitigate some of the risk. At the end, it's a mission that goes all the way to the moon. There's a lot of risk. A bit about the timeline. Right now we're completing the designs. We had a few weeks ago a preliminary design review going on in Israel. That's where we had between 40 and 60 engineers, depending on the subject, all in the same room, debating, shouting on each other, it's not going to work, that's going to fail. That's how you want them. You want them, pessimistic. That's how, if you go into the room and everybody will nod, it's not a good sign. And right now we're starting the construction of the spaceship. We're building our hybrid lab. That's a lab that simulates the entire moon atmosphere, and for instance, will supply video simulations to the cameras and to the processors to note that everything is working while we're here on Earth. And we plan on landing in 2015, and the mission will continue after we land. The SpaceIL brand was built as a STEM education brand. We're here to make an impact. We're not here just to land the spaceship on the moon. A bit about where we are today when it comes to our budget. Today we have $20 million out of the 30 that we need, and we believe the top part will come from Israelis and from the entire Jewish population in a large crowdfunding campaign. I'm really looking forward for that. It's going to be lots of fun. Besides the funds, it's also an amazing way to connect a lot of people. When you give out 18 shekels or $18, high dollars, you feel like you're part of the mission. And that's what we want people to feel like. It's not just about those donations, it's about taking part in something that is bigger, taking part in something that could impact Israel. So we're not waiting for the day of the landing or the launch to take place. We're not waiting for that moment to happen. We're an educational non-profit. So from day one, we're doing an educational impact. This is Jonathan, my partner. He's the guy in charge of the engineering team. And you can see what happens when he goes into it doesn't matter if they're 6 years old or 18 years old. Kids get excited about space. We were told by Professor Ben Israel, he told us when it comes to science, kids love 3 things. They love robots, they love space, and they love dinosaurs. So we're a robotic spaceship. I'm not really sure we'll find dinosaurs on the moon, but 2 out of 3 it's amazing to see the kids. We've already reached more than 27,000 kids this month. That's like the latest count that we have, and we're working on a nationwide program. The idea is to have a sustained impact on those kids, not just a singular moment when we land. That could be nice, but it won't, leverage the spaceship into STEM education. I'll tell you about one project that we're running. These kids are 15 years old, and they're not regular kids. They're from the elite scientists of the future of Israel, the team members. And they're also already doing, while they're 15-year-old, they're doing the bachelor's in science in Tel Aviv University. And we were approached by their professors, and they said, well, how can those kids be integrated into SpaceIL? And we said, well, we're going to give them a real mission, part of the SpaceIL team. And these kids get to choose where the Israeli spaceship will land on the moon. They're reviewing all the available spots. It's mostly where the Apollo landers went. And at the end, these kids will choose where the Israeli spaceship will land. Now think about it, you're 15 years old, and you get to choose where the Israeli spaceship will land on the moon. That's, you're hooked for life on science. And the concept now is, we can't, not all the kids of Israel will be allowed to choose really where the spaceship will land. But right now we're working on a nationwide program. My dream is that 10, 20 years from now, I'll meet an engineer, he'll tell me, you're from SpaceIL, right? Because of you, I became an engineer. I took part, I logged in online, and I took part in the mission, and that's why today I'm an engineer. And that's our goal, 10, 20 years from now, to see the real impact of SpaceIL. Here they're presenting the landing sites to President Peres in one of their events. How can you join the race or join SpaceIL? If you take an image of this QR code, it will lead you to our Facebook application, and your Facebook image will be downloaded or uploaded to the spaceship, and will be stored digitally on the spaceship, and will reach the moon with us when we go there. So that could be your part of the mission. About joining us, you can start by clicking on liking our SpaceIL Facebook page. You can join our mailing list. You can volunteer and contact us, and as well, of course, donate. But at the end, just remember SpaceIL Connected. Put it down in Google. It will take you to our website. You'll have all the options there. We think that tonight we're going to reach 10,000 likes on Facebook. In today's, in today's terms, the more likes you have on Facebook, you're more known to the world. It's we've been working for 2 years, but only in the past 3 or 4 months we started raising up the awareness for SpaceIL. Until then, we weren't that sure that we were going to reach the moon. We didn't have that big portion of the money that we have today. And today we're increasing our exposure. We started off with Israel. We just had an amazing news article, 15 minutes long, in one of Israel's top news channel, how do you say Madua?
Version.
Not version, it's like the Friday evening news in Israel. Edition, exactly. It has like 20-something rating, 20-something% rating in Israel. Last night, The Voice, you have The Voice here in the States, like the reality show. So there's an Israeli version of The Voice, and it showed a commercial of SpaceIL. Now, The Voice, it's not exactly science and physics, but that's where the kids are, and that's the power of SpaceIL. We're sexy enough for Channel 2 News or for the largest commercial media channels to have us on stage. It's a fun project, and that's where we want to be, where the kids are at. So right now we're increasing our exposure. If anybody here is going to be at APAC next month, you're going to see us there as well on stage. It's starting to, the pace is starting to grow faster, which is really fun. So if you have any more questions, I'm ready to answer them. And thank you anyway for listening. this evening.
Questions?
I just want to know on your program page, why do you need an export license to send something to the moon?
Oh boy, I think we're the only educational non-profit on earth that has an export to, a license to export weapons. According to the ITA rules, the International Trafficking of Arms Regulation, something like that, if I'm dealing with space, anything that's related to space, I'm considered a weapon. Then I have to show that I'm a non-profit, and this is a civilian project, and it's not classified, etc. This is not a weapon. And then you get a license to export weapons. So, for instance, if I want to talk with NASA, show them my plans, I have to ask for the Ministry of Defense for a clearance to talk with NASA. And from NASA, I'll get back, thank you. If they want to say, yes, no, it will work, it won't work, do it differently, they have to get a permit from the State Department as well. So SpaceIL, we have 3 law firms working pro bono for SpaceIL. It's not in our budget, but you know, once they gave us like they showed us how much money we would have paid for the legal services in the past 2 months or so. It was in the tens of thousands of dollars. And as a non-profit, you get a lot of perks, which is nice.
Hi.
Yes.
I have a science question, which is, so I know it's part of the prize requirements that you move 500 meters. Do you have any science goals for your hop at the 2 locations?
It's not the hub itself, but right now we're working with the Weizmann Institute on a small scientific payload. The concept here, think about the Spirit of St. Louis, okay, crossing the Atlantic for the first time. It couldn't take anything besides the pilot. And even he had to look from outside the window to see where he's going because everything was fuel tanks in front of him. But it showed that you can cross the Atlantic in one flight. And that led to a whole industry that crossed the Atlantic. And when you show that you can send a spaceship to the moon for $30 million, it opens up a new frontier. Instead, back in the 60s, it was a human mission, a manned mission. And the cost is estimated at today's term at roughly $200 billion. Mission to Mars is a few $1 billion. And now when you can send a spaceship to outer space for 30 or 50, I don't know, $100 million, you can do a lot more science for the same price. I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm sending a person to the United States, and he randomly lands, I don't know, in near Reno, in the desert. So he'll write back that the United States is a huge desert, there's no ocean, nothing, it's really hot and cold in the nights, and that will be his description of the United States. Now, if I send 20 people to the United States and spread them randomly, I'll have a much better accuracy of what the United States looks like. And it's the same. When you send one spaceship that costs $3 or $4 billion, it can do a lot more science in a specific space, in a specific spot. If you send 20 probes for the same price, you learn a lot more about that planet. And besides, it won't be just NASA or the European Space Agency or maybe the Japanese Space Agency sending out probes. Smaller nations will understand that they can also do things like that, or even large academic institutes. And you'll start seeing a lot more people, organizations reaching out to outer space. And that's what this competition is all about, advancing humanity through competition.
I have good news for you. 3 weeks ago, Operation Bill authorized President Obama to remove space technology from ITA.
Really?
Yes,
Wow,
including
that's
Israel.
new.
4 countries actually are not removed: China, North Korea, Iran, and Cuba. So we are not.
I'm clear.
Okay, and
This is really new.
Still a few months to run.
Yeah,
it's
3 weeks ago.
And then the Israeli government is going to take a few years to remove her ITA restrictions. So after we land on the moon.
Okay, the question is, are you going through a thermal back test?
Yes, in the Israeli aerospace industries, we have they have all the facilities needed. We don't have, we're going to have hard time testing all our electronics for radiation, for example, because we have a small place where we can check that in Israel. But when it comes to thermal vacuum test, we're covered by the Israeli aerospace industries. And we go through that, of course.
Because it will be difficult to send spacecraft without thermal vacuum.
Yes. Using commercial technology, it's yes. There's risk and there's going crazy.
Oh, go ahead.
What would you say is the most difficult part of the project technically?
Technically, raising the funds needed to send the space. It's really all the competitors. It's also about building a spaceship, but the hardest part is raising the funds needed to build the spaceship. We're racing against 22 other teams. Most of the strong teams are commercial entities. They're in it for the ROI, for the return on investment, and it's not easy for them. There's no real direct commercial benefit from sending a spaceship to the moon. SpaceIL is doing it a bit differently. We're talking about an impact on Israel. So our ROI is not measured in percentage of dollars. It's measured about the societal impacts that we can make on Israel, about creating a new civilian space industry in Israel. And when we look at that at the broader term, it makes a lot more sense than sending some of the business plan, for instance, talking about sending the ashes of dead people to the moon, or future IP that will be developed because of their spaceship. It's not an easy sell to an investor. On the technical side of the spaceship, I think that the management is the hardest part. You have your Israeli aerospace industry employees. They have like a bus that takes them to work at 7 a.m. At 4 p.m. the pencil drops or the pen drops and they go back home. They're quite isolated from the internet. This is a defense company, so everything is isolated from the internet. If you want to communicate with them via email, they have to go to a certain computer, and it takes a lot of time. And on the other hand, you have the SpaceIL volunteers. They work during the weekends and during the nights. It's the exact opposite of when the guys from the Israeli aerospace industries are working. And the guys from the IAI, from the Israeli aerospace industries, they're used to their methodologies that they've been working on for years and years. And then you have the young guys from the high-tech community joining in and saying, well, why do you need the DSP from Texas Instruments? Let's take an NVIDIA chip that runs much faster on our spaceship. And you have to, walk between the lines and just make sure that everything works together, and not to insult your volunteer, telling him that's rubbish, you can't take an NVIDIA chip, nobody has ever taken an NVIDIA chip, and you don't want to be the first one doing that thing. And on the other hand, relaxing the older engineers who are, they've been attacked by new ideas, which most of them are not that suitable for space. And in the middle, you have the full-time SpaceIL employees. And they work day and night, weekends, weekdays, just to try to coordinate everything. And so far it's been working. For instance, we have a few guys from the Weizmann Institute, and they're doing part of the control algorithms needed for the landing. Now, the Israeli aerospace industry is estimated that it's going to take 2 of their engineers a year to work on that algorithm. And those few volunteers who their PhDs from the Weizmann Institute did it in a few months. So at the end, it's working, but it takes out a lot of energy from the entire team to make it work. But that's how you do it for half the price or even less.
So I have a bit of a high-tech question.
Mm-hmm.
What will happen to, or what's happening with the inventions and patents that your SpaceIL is creating? What do you want to happen?
We had a debate within the team. So at the end, I have 22 competitors, all doing it commercially, or the strongest team doing it commercially. But they're not doing that well. So we're trying mostly to avoid the IP question. If I were a commercial entity, and I would would start the construction of my spaceship within the II facilities, they have a very strong union. There's a chance I would come one day to their facilities and something will be burned there, because the union won't allow a civilian space industry to compete with them directly. And when it comes to IP, What we settled on was that the IP that will be developed together with our partners will be theirs, and the IP that will be SpaceIL's IP will be used by the Israeli Space Agency for what they need and want in future missions. So we're really trying to get out of the commercial side of the mission because we don't want anything to do with that. Our vision is much bigger. All of our partners believe in our vision because joined us because they believe in our vision, not because of any equity that they have in SpaceIL. It's a non-profit, so I have zero equity.
Do you have any plans where exactly do you want to land?
There are a few points. It will be roughly around the equator, 20 or 30 degrees above or below. But at the end, it all depends on when the spaceship will be launched towards the moon or into orbit. For example, just the path from the Earth to the moon takes between 4 and 5 days. But the entire mission will take roughly a month. Because we're secondary payloads, we don't get to choose where the spaceship will go or when will it go. So we'll be waiting in Earth's orbit until the moon will reach a point where we can start our journey to it. And once we get there, once we know the date, we'll be able to calculate everything, all the path and everything, and the orbits, and know where we're planning on landing. But today we have a few options that we can choose on depending on the launch date and time.
Yeah, tough question, but you're not in this for the money. Obviously, you're spending 30 to maybe get 20.
Yeah.
If someone else got there before you even launched, would you still go?
The first thing, yes, of course. Second thing is that the other teams are talking about the budget between $60 to $100 million. They're doing it as a commercial entities, and the price goes up when you're a commercial entity. Our mission is also winning the competition. We will be very happy to win it when we win it. But our main goal is sending the Star of David, an Israeli spaceship, to the moon. And we were asked a lot of times that question, and our answer is we want to make an impact on kids in Israel and around the world. And when that's your goal, then you reach the moon anyway. Talking about another subject is that if a US company will beat us to the moon, well, the US flag is already there. We'll still be the third nation to land on the moon.
Go ahead. Right here.
Yes.
Oh, right here. What fuel and oxidizer are you using?
Well, the fuel is a mixture of something that is similar to hydrazine. I have to tell you that I don't really remember the chemical composition of the material. So if you want, I can check later on in a different presentation what exactly is the composition.
MMH and NTO.
Something in that family.
Yeah, there is no other choice.
Okay.
Yeah. From the perspective of being an entrepreneur, what's the most important thing you've learned as this project has emerged?
There's so much I've learned. Wow. Prior to SpaceIL, I worked for a large government unit, so it's very, very different. And the first thing that I learned is that you must have good mentors with you to lead you through the process. You don't want to fail. And believe me, SpaceIL has made so many errors. We could have closed, if it was a commercial company, we would have been closed like 10 times already because of all the mistakes we've been doing. And even with our mentors, nobody has ever tried sending a spaceship to the moon for a tenth of the budget or even less, using volunteers and the industry all together. So you learn on every day. It starts off with fundraising, it continues with marketing, with keeping all your volunteers informed and happy. Our volunteers are Israelis. Each one has its own opinion, and we must accept that opinion. It's not an easy task, but you spent a lot of hours listening to their complaints and what should be done and what shouldn't be done. So you learn a lot of HR matters as well. At the end, it's an entity that it's being created from day to day. So I can't start explaining what I've learned in the past 2 years.
If you do win, what will you do with the money?
We did a lot of thinking about that in the past months. And what we realized is that SpaceIL vision is impacting Israel in the realms of science and education by taking amazing and extraordinary tasks on ourselves in those fields. And today we're doing impacting STEM education and sending an Israeli spaceship to the moon. When we finish with that, we'll think about the next mountain we want to climb in those areas as a non-profit. So that would stay the same. But the goal, the mission itself would be different.
Kind of leads on to my question. After you've landed on the moon, what next?
2 weeks break. Then, each one of the founders has a different vision. I want to get rid of all the medusas in the Mediterranean Sea so people will be able to go to the sea without a problem. Jonathan wants to do a hardcore science, R&D. Kfir is all about education. So we'll have to sit down and see what's our next goal with all of our volunteers, team members, supporters, donors.
Still 8 other planets.
Exactly. Maybe the next mission will be to Mars. But at the end, I'm not a space guy. I mean, I really love space, and don't get me wrong. But I don't want to, just look at space. I want to look at science and education in the broader sense and choose from there. The day after, I'm one mission at a time.
Where's the money from the, when you win, where's the money from the Lunar X Prize going to go?
Into our next mission, which we will have to decide on. But it will be as a non-profit in the realms of education and science.
We'll take 2 more questions and
Will there be something holy possibly on board?
Sorry?
You be possibly bringing something holy on board, maybe a shrunken Torah or a...
We actually, the Technion have donated the Nano Bible. It's the entire Bible etched on like a silicon die. It just weighs a few grams, so we can take it with us to the moon. So we're going to have that.
I have a Jewish rocket scientist friend who works for JPL. She's worked on some of the Cassini and Galileo missions. I'm curious, are you partnering with anybody at JPL, and would you be interested in maybe having some contacts there?
Most of our connection today is to here to NASA Ames, but we're always happy to happy to have more connections. At the end, but there's a lot of ITAR issues going on, so I wouldn't want any one of your friends, getting in trouble. Exactly. So if you want to, you can ask her. There's no problem on our side, but first ask her if it's okay and everything, because I wouldn't want anyone to get in trouble because of those issues.
yes.
Yes.
Have you developed any kind of a program or presentation to give to U.S. Jewish kids in Hebrew school to interest them in the project? I never heard about the project, and develop both a pride in their Judaism and a pride in Israel, and maybe someday emigrate to Israel.
That will take place in the next few months. We're starting with impacting kids in Israel, and once we have that, we'll translate that into English with different aspects of turning it into a Jewish project, and that will be a bit along the road. At the end, we're 11 guys, 11 people, full-time employees. Half of them are engineers. And we're doing, people are working 24/7. It's been crazy in the past 2 months. It's gone hectic, and we just assume that the pace will just continue to rise.
I think on that note, we will close off the questions. I hope you will take questions one-on-one. Stick around. We have the room until 9 o'clock. You're welcome to stay and network and ask additional questions if you like. Thank you all for coming.